Hello friends and neighbors, it's Wednesday, September 7th, and it's time for me to put on my movie-loving hat.
So what am I doing? Hey, come on! Really?
Thanks for joining me.
What are you filming for?
So this video is going to partly be a response to Coda Lock Films' video from yesterday. It's partly going to be a response to a video by Hank Green, and it's partly going to be a response to a prevailing attitude that has cropped up among a lot of people, many of them, unfortunately, nerd fighters. A while back, Hank Green mentioned this idea that he had for a website called readitfirst.com. Basically, a website where you would make a pledge to always read a book first before you see a movie that's based on it. Yesterday, Jesse responded to that idea with ire. An ire I share. I recommend that you go watch Jesse's video from yesterday. He makes the case for movies very eloquently and succinctly and very, very well. And rather than just reiterate everything that he is saying, I'm going to attempt to answer his non-rhetorical question. His question is basically, why is it more acceptable for a book to ruin our experience watching a movie, but it's not acceptable for our movie to ruin the experience of reading a book? I'm going to change the question a little bit for reasons that I'll mention at the end, and the question that I'm going to answer is, why do we think that books are inherently better than movies? There are 6 reasons that I can think of. I'm going to share them with you, and then I'm going to share with you why I think these reasons are prejudiced, unfair, and pure bunk. Reason number 1, books have been around longer. Books have had thousands of years to establish themselves as a medium, whereas movies have only been around for a little over a century. So we know what we're doing with books a little bit better than we know what we're doing with movies. The problem with this statement is that while there are many, many pieces of classical literature, there are also many pieces of classical cinema. Already we have really great movies that hold their own against the really great books. Reason number 2, crappy movies are more prevalent. It does seem like that there are a lot more crappy movies out there than there are crappy books, but I think there's a reason for that, and it's related to the thing that I mentioned before. There are a lot of books out there, and so ones that don't sell, ones that aren't well written, are not going to be at the forefront as much. Whereas with movies, there aren't as many to pick one, and we are still kind of feeling our way with how to make a good movie, and so, yeah, there are going to be some crappy ones. In addition to that, a lot of people are really entertained by bad movies in a way that you can't be entertained by bad books. But the fact that there are really bad movies does not, in my mind, undermine the fact that there are also a lot of really good movies. Reason number 3, books usually come first. Usually you have a movie that's based on a book. It's not the other way around. You don't have a lot of books that are based on movies. Why is that? Again, books have been around longer. There are more of them to make into movies. But just because something came first does not necessarily mean that it's better. There's a way of thinking that I really don't agree with, which is that the original version of something must be the best because it's what the original author intended. But why can't a new adaptation breathe new life into an old and sometimes dated idea? Why can't a movie adaptation of a story actually make that story better? The answer is, it can. I'd be willing to bet that you could find some mediocre books that made some really great movies. Reason number 4, books are smarter. I hate this argument. I absolutely hate this argument. The idea that books are for more intelligent people because they require you to read rather than to watch. And one of the big reasons I hate this argument is that a lot of filmmakers hold and perpetuate this belief that movies cannot be smart. This is absolutely untrue. Movies can be just as intelligent as books can be. I mean, think about all the stuff that has to go into movies. You've got a lot of imagery, you've got visual effects, camera angles, you've got music, you've got lighting. All of these things can be really powerful and really suggestive. You can tell a really compelling story with hardly any words at all, and it doesn't make it any less intelligent than a book. Reason number 5, related to that one, books require a greater commitment. It takes time to read a book, but it doesn't take quite as much time to watch a movie. Therefore, movies are better suited for people with shorter attention spans than books are. Again, I have a real problem with this argument because the thing about books is that you can set it aside for a while. You don't have to experience all at once, and indeed many people don't experience all at once. You can read it as a diversion and then set it aside and do something else and then come back to it. With a movie, you really can't do that. I mean, you can, but it's not the same. When you watch a movie, you commit to watching that movie for the full hour and a half or 2 hours or however long it is, and it is an experience. In addition to simulating your imagination, it's visual and auditory, and it really gives you an idea of experiencing this story. Whereas with a book, you're separated by that barrier of words, and so you're always aware that you're reading a story. But with a movie, you're really allowed to experience it, and that requires a different kind of commitment, but not a lesser one. Reason number 6, books allow for you to use your imagination more. I do books versus movies reviews, as a lot of you know, and I have a category called imagery that I use in most of them. This is basically when I look at how the book or movie stimulates your imagination, either with the description in the book or the visual effects in the movie. And I have gotten comments saying both that books should always win imagery and that movies should always win imagery. Books and movies both stimulate your imagination, but they do it in completely different ways. Obviously with books you can't see what's going on, so you have to imagine what's going on. But movies have the power of suggestion, because what you're seeing on screen is often not what's really happening. It's your imagination that's filling in the blanks, and because you have all those subtle elements like lighting and music and camera effects and all that sort of thing, it allows you to imagine even more than beyond what you're seeing. Case in point, there was a scene from both the book and the movie version of The Time Traveler's Wife. Now, The Time Traveler's Wife is my favorite book of all time, but it also made a really excellent movie. And there is a scene where Henry has to say goodbye to his best friend Gomez. In the book, he kind of makes a speech. He tells Gomez that he's going, he says goodbye to him, and it's all very touching in its own way. In the movie, there is virtually no dialogue between them when Henry says goodbye, but that moment says so much more and in a much more compelling way than the same scene from the book did with the words. I mean, think about how hard it is to tell a really good and compelling story without the benefit of language. Movies can do that, and they can do that incredibly effectively, and that in itself activates the imagination. There are many different ways to tell a story, and watching movies alongside reading books can show us that. Movies aren't any better or worse than books, they're just different, and they are fascinating in their own way if you take the time to really look at everything that goes into them. And when it comes right down to it, a good story is a good story, no matter how it's told. And I always take issue whenever anyone talks about a movie ruining the experience of reading a book, which is why I took issue with the way that Jesse worded his question. I don't think that reading a book should ruin watching a movie any more than I think that watching a movie should ruin a book. In fact, I would submit to you that if a movie really, truly, honestly ruins your experience reading the book, then the book probably wasn't that great to begin with. Whether it be a book or a movie, if you have a good, compelling, and thought-provoking story in front of you, then nothing, not another version of the story, not another person's opinion, not a spoiler, can ruin that story for you. I'll see you tomorrow.